Taking One Step from God, first published in Mary Shall Reign, 1961, by Frank Duff. Often on the lips of St. Vincent de Paul was an intriguing phrase, taking your step from God. By this he meant that we are to keep our eye on God and try to see what indications he is giving us, for he is giving them all the time. Perhaps then we might say in our impatience, why is it only vague indications that he gives? Why does he not make his will plain to us so that we can do it? Here lies a problem which is an anxious one for us. On the one hand, God desires to signify his wish to us. On the other hand, he refrains from interfering with the operation of our personality, for it is one of his special ideas to respect that personality. He would prefer to see a word done by ourselves, even in a fourth-rate way, than to bring it to pass in a first-rate fashion by stepping in himself and treating us like babies. Somewhere between these extremes will God's action lie. Watching God. Unquestionably, God will respond to our advances by giving us inspirations and indications of his will. He is necessarily to do so, because, if thrown back absolutely on ourselves, we can do nothing. So we must make those advances to him. In part this will be done by deliberate acts and by prayer, but even more by developing an attitude of watching him. There is a phrase in Scripture which would explain this attitude exactly. It is the saying that we must be like the handmaid whose eyes are all the time on her mistress, seeking to anticipate her wishes. Our human tendency is to make up our minds strictly according to our own circumstances and notions, whereas the correct idea would be to throw the chief stress off ourselves and onto God, all the time waiting to take our step from him, trying to see his signs and to accommodate ourselves to them. This is a holy attitude which merits the grace of being shown his step. It is likewise a prayer which, if constant enough, amounts to contemplation. This procedure entails a certain hesitation in making our decisions, and this presents us with a little problem. One of the things which we like to credit to ourselves is strong-minded behaviour, i.e., that we know our own minds, that we can sum up situations perfectly and produce firm decisions quickly. Obviously, this would represent a different policy from a holding back and a deferring to God in the effort to see what he wants. Would such a hesitation on our part be a weakness, an indecision? Certainly not. It's only a prime fool who would rush into a decision without having all the facts. Any sensible person would seek to assemble all the materials for a decision before building that decision. In our Christian philosophy, that fact of God's wishes is a vital ingredient, and indeed the foundation of all other ingredients. Therefore, we must seek it, and that may mean waiting for it. Therefore, that tendency to wait does not denote indecision, but rather a proper degree of judgment, of weighing things up, and of reluctance to plunge recklessly into a blind decision. The way to decide. Very often it will be found that this action of turning to God brings at once the capacity to decide. I mean that until we looked in his direction, the mind was absorbed with the personal and the petty, and saw only the signpost of selfishness. It would be a grievous thing if those things determined the issue, but a glance towards God took the eye off that signpost and balanced the position. We saw a higher signpost, which made us realize that self was not the only thing that counted. Sometimes that look towards God reveals a spiritual principle, which would outweigh secondary aspects. On it we could base a decision right away, being sure that it is as the main road leading to our destination. If our inspection of a position does not reveal that principle or definite signpost, it is well to refrain from that decision and action so long as we remain in doubt, and where the possibility exists of postponing. This suggestion has reference to the fact that commonly God only gives his lights when they are needed, and not a long time ahead. His sense of economy enters in there. He is like a building contractor who would not place on a site far in advance of actual building all the materials for that building. Obviously, this latter procedure would lead to a deterioration and a pilfering. But it is one of our weaknesses to worry about things far in advance and to want light then. Therefore, we must restrain our impatience and believe that we will receive the needed help in time. So I repeat, as far as possible, do not make final decisions until the proper time arrives. How God shows himself. How does God show himself? Sometimes in little ways that we have to be on the alert for, sometimes in unquestionable ways. For instance, the voice of duty can be positive enough, likewise the call of charity, likewise the advice of wise counsellors. These are things to which we are bound to attach great weight, for they can represent God speaking quite loudly. It is not to be expected that his wish will appear on the skyline like a neon sign. It would probably be better for us that it should not evidence itself in that way, for if it does, it will probably be a drastic and uncomfortable business, almost as if we have to pay dearly for being told so plainly. God's manifest signposts are such as the one he showed to St. Paul when, to the accompaniment of light shining from heaven, he threw him from his horse and deprived him of sight, and a voice spoke shattering words to him. This multiplication of miracles was a neon sign to tell Saul that he had become Paul, that the Jewish wolf had changed into the Christian lamb, that the arch persecutor had yielded place to the great apostle of the Gentiles. But perhaps if he had been willing to follow gentler ways of conversion, he would have been spared that mental martyrdom, those days without sight spent in such anguish of soul that he could neither eat nor drink. A kindred event was the cannonball which broke St. Ignatius's leg at Pamplona and put him to bed. Out of that bed he emerged with his dreams of military glory switched from Spain to Jesus and Mary, a rough way for a tough spirit. In a lesser order it can be so with ourselves. We are charging along at great speed, full of ourselves and sure of our course. But in a second we find ourselves sprawling on the ground, hurt all over. We pull ourselves together and examine the position. We've run into a wall. This may not be a final matter. It may only be an obstacle placed by the devil in the way of God's plan. So we have to test it by trying to get over it or around it. In the end, this may be possible, in which case a sorer and wiser man, we pursue our uninterrupted road, or the searching around may disclose to us very profitable territory, better than what we had been aiming at. On the other hand, it may have been God who stopped us, so that after much trying we find we cannot go on. That may represent a cruel hurt to our desires. To have to retire will impose a severe test on our faith. To wait meekly till God speaks again may need heroic patience, that virtue which combines in itself nearly all the other virtues. But Scripture promises that the patient man shall sing victory, and some day the indication will come to us of God's further wishes. When in due time that new course is open to us, we will find that it has been in various ways a blessing, that it has improved our original plan and perhaps saved us from disaster.